So, Gladiator II is the sequel to Ridley Scott's Gladiator, and this is kind of more of like a more of like an audience pleaser film for Ridley Scott, because I think that, with his past films, like his last film that he did, Napoleon, was like a little bit more of like a prestige film. And it was lavish to look at. It was boring in some spots, and Joaquin Phoenix's performance was, I think, for some people, like it was far too muted. Like, it was a bit muted for me, but I think for the most, I liked the few scenes where it did work. But yeah, like Scott hasn't had like a big mass appeal film, so I guess it makes sense to go back to Gladiator, since people remember that film, and it's a big epic, big historical epic that people would actually be interested in because they remember the title. And I think this film kind of plays up to Ridley Scott's more audience-pleasing traits of, just the way that he stages his films with their epic nature and just the violence that he puts into them. Because I think the one line from this film that I think perfectly sums it up is when Denzel Washington's character mentions that violence is the international language. And I think that's very much true for Ridley Scott's strength as a director when it comes to these types of films. And it's not just because that, violent action films, they play much better abroad because, they don't rely on dialogue as much. And that kind of is the case here, too, with Gladiator 2 as well. But it's Ridley Scott's strengths. It's the biggest strength of Ridley Scott. And I think that's because, like, the best thing that I loved about his last film, Napoleon, was just the way that he staged the war scenes. They were violent, they were grand, they were exciting, they were vicious, they were brutal. They were the best part of that film. And I think that Scott leans more into that with Gladiator 2, but I think at a little bit of a sacrifice of like a more compelling story to go on top of it here. Because I was a little bit torn about this film at first, because it feels like this film has two modes. It goes between either incredibly gruesome and vicious violence, where you're watching the slaves fighting for their freedom in the Colosseum against all sorts of animals like primates and rhinos and armored guards and all this stuff, and it's brutal and it's bloody and it's violent. It's got decapitations and amputations, got all that stuff. But when you're out of the ring, a lot of the dialogue just feels kind of, it's more or less the same problem as Napoleon, but I think it's a much different problem. I think the problem with Napoleon was that it was a bit too dull and dry, and here it feels like all the action-free moments are kind of played up more for melodrama, almost as though it were a soap opera. Because, like, it just kind of feels like it's going through the motions for a lot of these moments. And I think this is mostly true for how the film stages its central hero of Lucius, played by Lucius, played by Paul Mescal. And he is the son of Maximus, who you might remember was established at the end of, like, the first film, who had to run off for, like, his safety. And here's the thing. If you have not watched the first Gladiator film, don't worry. You will not need to watch it. There actually is a very mesmerizing, kind of like painterly rotoscope version that recaps the last film in the opening credits, which I thought was kind of cool. It's like, okay, this is a good way to get you excited for the film. It recaps the last film with just a handful of scenes while the opening credits are still playing. I think this is a good way to, kind of get yourself ready for the film. The problem is, the film keeps reminding you, it keeps having flashbacks to Gladiator to remind you, like, oh, by the way, yeah, this is Lucius. He's the, the son of Maximus. So you're gonna have to gotta remember that. And in case you don't, we're gonna flash back to, scenes of Russell Crowe as Maximus, so the connection here. And I wish that the film didn't have to do that, because I think there would be enough interest to see what Lucius would do. I keep saying that name, yeah, Lucius or Lucius, but I think it would do the film good not to keep reminding you of that movie, because it feels like Mescal is just trying to replicate Russell Crowe's performance throughout, and I think that's mostly just because, like, he's going through the same motions that his dad did too. It's like, it feels like history is just repeating itself once again here, because he starts off the film as this warrior in Africa trying to defend this stronghold, and gets overtaken by Rome, and this Roman general of Marcus Acacius, played by Pedro Pascal. He kills his wife and imprisons, Paul Mescal's character. So Mescal is like, okay, I've got to, I'm going to fight my way to freedom, and, I'm going to get my revenge on Pedro Pascal. Now, while at the same time, while he's kind of fighting his way to the top, Marcus is now the current husband of Lucia, once again played by Connie Nielsen, who of course is the wife of Maximus. So, once she realizes that her son is alive, she's torn between her husband and her son, especially since her husband is trying to arrange an insurrection of Rome because the citizens are tired of the two emperors here of Geta and Caracalla, I think, yeah. And they're trying to stage an insurrection, so, she's with her husband on that front, but at the same time, she doesn't want to see her son die in the ring, and of course, eventually we'll get to that moment where the two of them will have to fight each other, and you get, like, that sense of dread and despair about, how the state is working against these people. But even when you have that emotional drive, the film, it feels like it keeps falling back on melodrama to the point where it's like the music has to kind of pick up the slack here, because a lot of the characters are speaking more in, like, they're either speaking in two modes. They're either speaking in an expositional tone of their strategy about how they're gonna, win the next match, or how they're gonna progress through politics, how they're gonna move up, and how they're gonna stage the next part of their plan. And it's all approached with this almost kind of like maddening level of, like, stoicism that is just smothered in melodrama here, where the characters try to play up their emotions while the music swells. And I think for some people it'll be fine because, it's just, you sit through it and then you get some cool violence later, which you do. I think you get, like, but you get, like, the violence almost as a little bit of, like, a treat, because, like, the Colosseum battles I found kind of brief, and I think that's mostly just because like, Mescal has to move up in the ranks, and he has to, like, fight pretty smart, but also pretty quickly in these matches as well. So it feels like we had a very quick dose of that violence, and we're back to, Mescal brooding, or, Pascal planning, and Nielsen just, kind of struggling with her emotions, and just, being bitter and angry and sad the whole time. And just like the Emperor duo just playing it up as being, eccentric douches, who take no note of the fact that people hate them, and they just want to rule, and they just want to feed their egos the whole time. So it feels like everything is kind of just working like clockwork, but without much surprise or extra vigor. Because it feels like a lot of the characters here are just kind of, like, standing back and letting the grand historical staging of, like, all, like, the historically accurate costumes, and, like, the naval vessels, and, like, the Colosseum, and the palace, and the city streets of all, like, the poor people, trying to struggle to make it in Rome, and, showing, like, the decay of Rome. It feels like all the actors are just, like, standing back, just stating their lines straight to the camera, doing what they need to do, and then getting out of the way so that you can appreciate all of the visuals. Now, the one saving grace for this film, though, the one character that is a lot of fun to watch, is Denzel Washington as this gladiator groomer called Marcinus. And Washington is having fun in this film. Like, it feels like everyone else is just being, like, stiff and stoic. Washington is playing up his role as this instigator and manipulator of everybody. He's manipulating Mescal to be, like, his prime gladiator, so he's kind of, like, playing on his emotions and his desire for revenge. And he's also, playing up to, like, the emperor, saying, like, hey, I'm on your side here. And just every scene that he's in, I love, because, like, whenever he approaches someone, he has, like, this feeling of great intimidation and excitement, where he flashes that grin, and you either know, like, okay, he's gonna have fun and, like, drink up a storm of wine, and drink up a storm and just talk shit and have so much fun, or he's gonna collect and slit some throats. He's gonna do one of the two, and he is just having a ball. He is so much fun in this film. I didn't even want the film to be about Paul Mescal and Pedro Pascal and Connie Nielsen or even the Emperors. Forget all that. I want to see all of Washington's roles all of Washington's parts in this film just diced up, and that to be Gladiator 2, because every scene he's in, he has a presence, he has an exuberance, he has an energy, he has intimidation, he even has like a horniness to him that just works for all those scenes of just like this master manipulator, that I wanted the film to be all about him. And I think the film does kind of make the smart call of more or less leaning into him more as the primary villain, which did please me. If it weren't for the fact that a lot of like the problems that I had with the first Gladiator film are still present in Gladiator 2 as well, and I think even played up to a heavier degree, where it made all the fights feel so hollow, because I wasn't caring as much for these characters. It felt like they were just stating what needed to be said in between these moments of grand carnage and violence, which, don't get me wrong, is cool to watch, but if I'm not caring that much about the characters, then what's the point? It's like, I kind of feel for Mescal in like, the basic sense of, him wanting revenge and trying to, find some like level of like satisfaction in his life after so much darkness. But all Mescal can really do in the moments when he's not just, performing all this great fight choreography is he's just like screaming out in pain for his friends who are dying. Or he's just like bitterly, stating, I'm not going to be your slave, or I want to destroy all of Rome. Or he's giving inspirational speeches about strength and honor that just came off as so banal to me the more that the film kept going on. That even with all the cool violence, I wasn't grooving on it as much, especially since, when you see like Denzel Washington, you'll know what I'm talking about. Like, he's the heart and soul of this film, that anytime he's not on screen, I started getting a little bit depressed because I just wanted that presence, because he's like the only like life in this film, whereas everyone else feels like they're stuck in a costume drama where they just have to, just stay there and, just sit down and state like the explicit emotions they have to bring about, or engage in fight sequences where most of what they do is just like screaming and yelling, and the few times where they actually do show compassion and despair, like it feels like it's kind of made to order. So your mileage might vary for this film. I think if you like the last Gladiator film, you're probably gonna like Gladiator 2, but more on a visceral level, because like on an emotional level, I didn't really feel much here, and I felt like a lot of the aspects of legacy and honor and strength just felt kind of phoned in with all like, like the speeches and, like the typical displays of Colosseum violence. Whereas, I found myself way more engaged with how Denzel Washington plays up his role of moving his way through Roman politics. So yeah, I found myself even more frustrated because I felt like with Napoleon, there was a little bit something to explore with the character, on a level beyond just like his simplistic egotistical goals, where it feels like all the characters within Gladiator 2, save for Denzel Washington, are just on this one track without much complexity. And they're also bound by a lot of, the lore of the last film, where it feels like they're kind of trapped. And not just because Paul Mescal is a slave, just it feels like they're trapped within their specific roles and can't really veer outside of that, or else they would get in the way of like all the staging of like this Roman drama and action epic. So yeah, this is not Ridley Scott's best film, and honestly, I would probably have to go back and watch Gladiator to see like if there was. I felt like there was a little bit more emotion in Gladiator, but within Gladiator 2, I wasn't digging on it, and it made the violence and like all the Colosseum fights like not feel as exciting as I would like them to, which sucks, because like the staging to them is really good. I like the little naval sequence they have where Mescal is he's captaining his ship that's gonna destroy this other ship for like a coliseum of people cheering on. That's a cool visual, but just I wish I could care more about his character, and I just didn't, because it felt like he's locked into this role and he's not really going outside of his element here. So yeah, Gladiator 2 is really not that great of a film, with the exception of Denzel Washington.